Welcome to Extra Takes, hosted by Northland Church Senior Pastor, Dr. Joshua Laxton. Join us each week as Pastor Josh reveals the rest of the story behind his sermons. We'll discuss how those who follow Christ can live out a biblical vision for the church in our world today.
Well, hello, Northland family and friends. Welcome to another episode of Extra Takes. Hey, we got something different for you today. A few weeks ago, I was invited to be on the Mike Gilland show. It's here in Orlando, and it goes all over the regional area and a little bit beyond. And so I wanted to play that interview for you that Mike, he just asked me a lot of questions about pastoring, about what it meant to lead Northland. He also asked me about what our goals were. And so I just wanted to play that for you so that one, you can just hear straight from me, and it's just more vision casting and actually more philosophical in terms of how I go about leading and leading us to be what I would call faithfully present to the Lord and to the community in which He has planted us. So enjoy this conversation I have with Mike Gilland. Blessings.
What a privilege it is for me to have in the studio with me the senior pastor of Northland. And Northland is a church that is a large church. If you know anything about it, it's been around a long time, has quite a fun history, starting off in a roller skating rink. And we'll hear more from Josh. Josh Laxton is the senior pastor, and I got to meet him face to face today for the very first time. Nice to have you here, Josh.
Well, Mike, it is a privilege and an honor to be here, so thanks so much for the invite.
You are certainly welcome. Now, I met the senior pastor back in the day. Joel Hunter was there, and Joel and I worked on a couple of projects in the city together when I was a pastor in Orlando way back when, in the 80s and early 90s. And
way back when. I love it, in the 80s.
Well, when you're as old as I am, you know, the 80s actually... I was 30 some odd years old in the 80s, so it doesn't seem like that far back. Right. But when I look at the calendar, 40 years ago.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah. The 80s, I'm an 80s baby.
Yeah.
So early 80s. So yeah, when you say way back, it is way back, because my children even go, man, you're old. But
it's all the way back for you.
It's all the way back to the very beginning.
Now, you came here in
2022.
I was going to say 2 to 3 years ago, then, right? And so you were not from this area originally, but from the Tennessee area. So tell us a little bit about that.
Wow. So, I mean, it's a long journey from Tennessee to Florida. But around the age of 14, 15 is when I was called into ministry. I didn't know what that meant. I always liken it back to Samuel when, he woke up in the middle of the night and he's like, Eli, did you call me? And he's like, no, boy, go back to bed. And so at the end of the day, Eli's like, hey, the Lord's calling you. You just need to say, here I am, Lord. And so that was around 15, years of age, where I'm like, I knew that the Lord was calling me. Just didn't know what that really meant, other than I would be serving Him in the church. And so, and then just my life just unfolded in God's sovereign plan. So went to Union University in Jackson, Tennessee, which is in between Memphis and Nashville. And so got a biblical studies major there with an operational management side.
There you go. That's practical.
So that was very practical, and it has served me well. And I've really deepened that knowledge. And then in those years, met my wife. Then went to seminary at Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary in North Carolina. And then from there, started serving, even before then, started serving local churches. And so I was serving local churches while going and getting my Master's of Divinity, and then eventually got my PhD in mission, and served churches in Tennessee, Georgia, Kentucky, Illinois, and now I find myself in Florida.
You look way too young to have a couple of doctorates there. That's just crazy. You have a DMin, which...
I have an MDiv, so a Master's of Divinity. And then I skipped the DMin and went straight for the PhD.
Yeah,
so
that's just really amazing. So a couple of advanced degrees there, and it is really wonderful to see a young man like yourself having applied yourself. I mean, that's no small feat what you did.
No, I mean the PhD. I never thought of myself as PhD material because I'm from I'm from rural Tennessee, so I'm like not to speak bad about people from the I'm from rural Tennessee, for the rural South, and so but I never thought of myself as PhD material.
Yeah.
Sure, I've thought about getting a DMin because that's a very practical degree, but it just so happened where the seminary I was wrapping up my MDiv at started an applied theology PhD in missiology. So the theology of mission, and as a pastor, because I started pastoring at 24. I don't know if that's right or wrong. It's just how God set it up in my life, because there was a lot of things that I learned as a very, very young pastor.
Were you a lead pastor?
I was a lead pastor.
At 24.
At 24, I did what we called a replant. So we shut down a church and then we relaunched it. So it was a hybrid between starting with a old church who had declined down to about 30 people, average age about 65. And they were willing to be closed down for a season and to be relaunched and replanted. And so it was a hybrid of you're going into an established church, but you're also launching a new church at the same time. And so I learned the good, the bad, and the ugly of church replanting, and the good, the bad, and the ugly of me at 24, 25, 26 years of age.
But you know what? You talk about this operations manager aspect of your education. When you are a lead pastor, a senior pastor of a place like Northland, that is a very large, many would call a mega church. When you are the lead pastor, senior pastor of a place like that, there's a lot of management, just good old fashioned business, corporate type of decisions that to have that kind of an operations managing training that you have really comes in handy.
Well, it comes in handy, and this is part of God's plan and journey that he has had me on, because years ago I really did a deep dive in what I would call, and what other people would call, organizational leadership, where I even still to this day teach organizational leadership at Wheaton College in their graduate school, and their Lifton Divinity School.
There you go.
And so and this is where, when you look at even the history of the megachurch, and even now how some people give a megachurch a bad name because they're like, oh, it shouldn't be that big. Well, okay, churches come in all shapes and sizes, and I do believe that God uses all kinds and all shapes and sizes of churches. But the whole idea of being against a church because of business principles or because of organizational leadership, I really take issue with that, because when you go back, because again, as a person who has a PhD in mission, I've studied the mission of God from Genesis to Revelation and continue to learn and really develop my understanding theologically of God's mission. And so when you look at Genesis 1 and you see what God's doing there in bringing the heavens and the earth into existence, day 1, day 2, day 3, God is actually creating the systems and structures by which he will house the life in day 4, day 5, day 6. And so at the heart of what we see in creation, at the heart of what we see in God developing his kingdom, of bringing his kingdom to earth as it is in heaven, there are structures and there are systems that he designs and develops so that the flourishing of life can happen. So regardless of whether it's a small church running 100 or whether it's a mega church or running 2,000, 10,000, you definitely need to think through systems and structures that are housing the life of God's people there that bring flourishing. And so I really developed that. And then even when you look at Acts and you see really one of the first issues that we see in the New Testament church, particularly with the widows, it was a structural issue. It wasn't a theological issue. It wasn't like they were trying, to look over the Hellenistic widows, Jewish widows there, and so it was a structural issue. And so they give a structural plan to make sure they care. Right. And so that's what we really do, at Northland, is that how do we bring about healthy systems and structures that will house the life, and that that is a deep desire of mine, because if you even think about multiplication, where Jesus says, "Hey, I want you to go and make disciples of all nations," you've got to think strategically, structurally around that if you really want to do it well.
Mm-hmm. Now, doing it well is something that a lot of people would say, well, it's easier for a large church because you have more resources. And I think that part of that may be true, but then there's there's all sorts of other responsibilities and maybe even considered to be challenges that a large church will have, some of which is overcoming what you were alluding to earlier, and that would be a predisposed idea that some people have, like, well, a church shouldn't be that big. Like,
right.
It's the way you said it.
Yeah.
Church shouldn't be that. And they want an us four and no more kind of a thing, and that's not right either for all churches. Some churches need to be smaller.
Yeah, and I think it's just the capacity of the person that God has called. I mean, there are some people that have a great capacity to truly scale. There are some that I believe that have a capacity to reproduce leaders, and that's, again, it goes back to all shapes and sizes of churches, depending upon God's wiring for the leader. I do believe that God has wired me in a way to be able to lead large entities. And again, but even leading large entities, you want to also make them feel small because you want people to be known. So I'll give you for instance of what we have done at Northland. So Northland, I mean, years ago, I think they did have something, that is similar to membership. I mean, they did have a membership class, but for me, like, I really do want to get back to, what does it truly mean to be a member of a church? And for Northland, I mean, membership doesn't mean you get to vote on things, but membership really means that you are partnered with a people of God for the mission of God.
Yeah.
And what we have done at Northland is that if you go through membership, and so we have a progression, a process where we take them through belong, believe, become. This is what we believe. This is what it means to be a disciple. This is what it means to be part of a church. And then we take them through a class called Made for Mission, and I teach that. And so we look at the mission of God from beginning, Genesis to Revelation, and what does it mean? Because if you're going to join Northland, here's what you're saying. You are partnering with these people called Northland Church for the advancement of God's mission in the world. So when you do that, you sign this covenant that, hey, this is what I'm agreeing to, and this is what we know that Northland is agreeing to us. It's this partnership in ministry and mission. Then what we do is we assign you a person of care. We call it a POC. So every person has that goes through membership has a person of care. So every man would have a man, that is a person of care. And so these people of care have anywhere from 10 to 15 people that they are in charge of, that through the year, they are supposed to connect with them every single month, whether via text or email or call, depending on what people are comfortable with. And then at least every year, they're to come face to face, take them out to dinner, coffee, whatnot. And so, because we want every person to be known by name and to be overseen by Northland. And so that's just a way we can make a big church small, and so that's a structural thing. But it's a way that we care for people well.
I love the word I've heard you use a couple of times now, to be known.
Yeah.
And that is really the heart of being a part of the fabric of that church, is to have your life where you're not just in there, you're not just warming up a seat on a Sunday morning, but you're known, you're active, there's accountability of some form that's going on in your life. People know where you are, they know what you believe, and there is this partnership, like you said, where you're joining together. Doesn't mean it's going to be a perfect place. There are no perfect churches.
Right.
I love that old joke that says, if I ever came to one, it wouldn't be perfect any longer because I'm there now,
Exactly.
That's what it is. But just because it's a large church, I thank God for Northland because of just the influence that you can bring. And having heard about you and your arriving there, I was excited to have you come in the studio and tell our listeners about this wonderful church that, is right in our midst. It's right here in the Orlando area, one of the larger churches around. And yet, as I say that doesn't mean just from a Sunday morning standpoint, but from a standpoint of influence and work in the community.
Absolutely. Well, and one of the elements of Northland's history is it has been around over 50 years. and it has had its mountaintops and its valleys. So it's had its highs and its lows. And so any church, and this is what I would say, any church has been around that long, they've had their highs and they've had their lows. And one of the things that I really stress at Northland is to remember our history and where God has brought us from and what he has brought us through. Because in 2010, that was the height of Northland. And every single weekend at our main location, because Northland has had several campuses throughout its history. We only have our main campus right now. And it was that way when I came in 2022. But in 2010, it was the height, running about 10,000 on average, on weekends there. And then, through the years, it started to decline, for various reasons. And by 2017, right before Joel stepped down, it was around 2,700, 3,000. So it was even declining under Joel. And then when Joel steps down in 2017, there's this vacuum of leadership. Yeah. Who are we? I mean, because Joel had led it well for so many years, but had gone through a lot of just difficult seasons, right. Kind of towards the end. But now Northland doesn't know who are we. This is our leader for 32 years, and so there's this vacuum of leadership. Northland leadership tries to make some decisions early on to try to stop the bleeding, and I think they do for the most part, because right before COVID, so 2020, right before COVID, Northland was still running around 2,300, 2,400. Then COVID hits, and they have no
played a number on everybody.
Yes, and they have no pastor, so they were going into COVID with no momentum, with actually a momentum towards decline. And so from 2020 to 2022, there was no pastor during COVID. And then when I got there, they were under 700. So around 650 people in person. Wow. And this is
I did not know that.
This is what we know of churches, that, and this is something that I've seen throughout my years, is the church is fragile. The church is fragile. I mean, years ago, there was this podcast called The Fall of Mars Hill, and Mark Driscoll. Yeah, and so, sure. I mean, they were there one day and within weeks, gone, completely gone. 17,000 people completely displaced because Mars Hill closed its doors. And so we've heard stories like that. So it was only by the grace of God that Northland was still in existence. And what we've seen over the last 3.5, almost now 4 years, is just God's grace. Because yes, we're back, we're stable, we're around the 2,000 mark. We have created a separate nonprofit. We have created commerce business entities that do ministry and mission, but that are sustainable and scalable because the budget can no longer support them. And so it was just God's grace and how he sent me here for such a time as this. It has been an Esther moment.
Well, it is to grow from 600 or 700 to 2,000 in 3 years. That's pretty amazing. And a lot of that obviously is part of just the gifting that God has given you and the faith that God has given you. But I know that people are excited that you're there, and we are grateful for this partnership that Northland brings into the Christian community, because you guys do so much, and it's exciting to see. And I look forward to having more of our discussion with Josh Laxton, the senior pastor at Northland, and he is going to hang around for another segment here with me, and I will be right back right after this message. This is the Mike Gilland Show, and you're on The Shepherd. It is my joy to have Josh Laxton from Northland. He's the senior pastor, and just getting to know Josh, I can see why the members of this church are so excited. He is a man of vision, a man of purpose, and I believe God, for your age, has sown a lot of wisdom into you, my friend.
Well, I do tell people, if there's anything good that comes out of this mouth and this life, it's from him. And if there's anything bad that's from me. So yeah, so if wisdom does come out, obviously wisdom is from above, and so make sure I give him credit quickly.
Yeah, it's so fun to talk to people like yourself that at a very young age, 24, when you were first given the rein of the ride, so to speak. Yeah. You pick the reins up and you're riding this thing called a church at age 24. That does something in terms of building experience, and I had a friend of mine one time in the ministry say that the difficulty with being young is that it's a trial and error thing. He said you make so many errors, they become a trial.
That's true. Well, and I look back because I pastored churches that were in decline, in significant decline. So I was all in when it came to replanting and revitalizing churches, because at that stage in the early 2000s, there was a lot of focus on church planting, where all of the younger guys going into ministry or in ministry, they're planting because in some senses they can build it from the ground up. And so there's pros and cons to that. And so even in my 20s, and again, having gone through an MDiv, and then having just started a PhD, I'm thinking to myself, God, what are you calling me into? And I really believe that He called me to the established church. And so when I look over my journey in the established church, being the pastor at multiple churches that were in need of revitalization, I learned the good, the bad, and the ugly of leading churches through change. And then I actually learned the good, the bad, and the ugly of Josh Laxton's leadership. Yeah. And so I actually look back, because
that can be one of the most painful things.
Oh, it was one of the most painful things, because they were actually short tenures. And so I look back and I look at it as the gracious breaking of God in my life. And I go back to Genesis 32, where God actually wounds Jacob, where he will live the rest of his days with a limp. Yep. And so that's where I tell people today, I lead from a place of brokenness. And because of all of the things that I had learned about my leadership and the dark side of leadership, but then I actually learned a lot about change. In fact, I actually have a new book coming out this May called Pivot with Purpose. It's it's actually a practical guide to advancing, flourishing in seasons of change. And so through my experience of leading churches through change, leading my own self through change, I actually learned the difference between change and transition. Change is situational, but transition is psychological. And I'm like, man, I wish I would have known that when I was 24, but I'm like, I was 24. but now, and that's what God had prepared me to lead Northland through this season, their greatest season of change and transition.
That's exciting to hear. You're right, but you're still a young man by any stretch of the imagination.
Exactly.
There. And so again, to learn these things and then to get to apply it, one of the things that I love talking to people like yourself who's gone through the process way beyond what many people ever think of with regard to education, and to reach up and get that PhD, it is more than just a title. It is more than just some letters to follow your name. It really is a sacrifice of gargantuan proportion from my standpoint. Yep. But along with that, and I don't know that everyone understands the importance of part of that process, and the culminating of the process is this thing called a dissertation, in which the candidate for the PhD, like yourself, has the choice to pick a topic and a direction to go with. That is really to be a significant part of the aim of this study and your entire doctorate. And so tell us about what it was that God gave you to aim at during that PhD.
I mean, you're exactly right, Mike, and I appreciate you noting how much of an accomplishment it is. Because again, my wife wishes I touted it a little bit more, but I didn't go through the PhD process for the accolades and the acclaim. I went through it because it really was a spiritual journey. I wanted to know all I could know about God's mission and leading His church effectively, because what I had seen and what I was witnessing was a declining North American church, and a weak church when it comes to theology and mission. And so I wanted to know everything I could possibly know about leading God's people to partner with Him in mission, but you needed to know what His mission is. And so the dissertation is supposed to be this academic contribution. And so obviously I wanted it to be an academic contribution, but most importantly, I actually wanted it to be a blueprint for the church.
Wow.
Because what I had also learned all the way up until that point, if you kind of look really over the last several decades in just the West and North America, you had several models of church that came on the scene. So you did, like, when you look at the Methodist and the Baptist in the 1800s, you're talking about, they took America by storm, but it was really through the rural areas. So as the West kind of expanded, you had all of these kind of, Baptists and Methodists that they're going to these rural areas, which is why Baptists and Methodists, particularly in the South and Midwest, they're in a lot of these rural, smaller areas outside of cities. So you had the rural church that really was a predominant model in the 1718 and the early 1900s. But then really in the 70s, 80s, you have this thing called the mega church that came, that started to happen. And then in the, kind of 80s and 90s, when things started to wane in these traditional churches, you have now the seeker church movement that comes along. Now, some people, man, they loved it. We're not your grandma's church. And so you had the Saddlebacks and the North Points and all of that blow, when I say blow up in a good way, Willow Creek, that blow up in a good, in a good way. But there are some people very skeptical of the seeker church movement. Then it was the incarnational church. Then it was the emerging church. Then it was the missional church in the early 2000s. But you don't, so literally, I have not heard of any other model in 10, 15 years. So what I wanted to do was to actually create what is the new model that's not only for the North American church, because we tend to do things that only, in some sense, we Westerners can do, Americans can do. And so I wanted to go back to the Bible. What is the mission of God? What does it really mean to engage your community, your city, regardless of where you are planted, whether it is in Orlando or whether it is in Rwanda or Uganda or Manaus, Brazil. And so that's what I wrote about, is how a church engages.
Wow. And you just listed off all of those names of those different movements, and those are almost like periods, like epochs of time in the church history here, like missional. And you're right. And the funny thing is, I had on my bookcase books that had every one of those titles that you were talking about, because that was the big emphasis. And pastors were trying to learn and trying to catch up and stay up with what's going on. But we've got to get back to the basics. And I heard a phrase years ago that if you want to keep the main thing, you got to stay with the main thing here.
Exactly.
And that's really what it is. We got to go back to the Bible and see, where is it? What are we supposed to be doing here with our life?
Absolutely. And when you look at what God's doing, and this is what he's doing from Genesis to Revelation and for all of eternity, he's bringing his kingdom from heaven to earth.
Yeah.
So that's always been his goal, is to bring heaven to earth, his kingdom to earth. And so what he's always asked his people, and you see this throughout the journey, the story of Scripture. So Adam and Eve, what did he want to do? What did he want from Adam and Eve in the garden? He wanted faithfulness. Yeah. He wanted them to be faithful as they were fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, subdue it, and have dominion. So he wanted them to relate, create, and operate under his lordship is what he wanted. And as they would relate, create, and operate, they would actually be bringing heaven to earth, as they would be imaging the glory and the beauty and the radiance of God. Well, Adam and Eve, they were unfaithful. God kicks them out of the garden. And so then you see in God's redemptive plan, he's going to save a man by the name of Abram. He's going to create a people from Abram, and there they would be Israel, and he would give them a promised land, and he would tell them to be faithful. He would give them laws, moral, civil, ceremonial laws for them to be faithful. And he said, as long as you are faithful, you will enjoy long life in the land. If you are unfaithful, I'm going to kick you out of the land. And he had called them to be a light to the nations. Well, they were unfaithful. So what does he do? He kicks them out of the promised land. And so then you fast forward throughout the scriptures, and you get to Jesus and the Gospels, where Jesus is the better Adam. Jesus is the better, he is the better Israel. And so he is completely faithful to all of God's commands, and he is bringing heaven to earth. That's what we see in John 1:14. And the Word became flesh, and he tabernacled. He dwelt among us. And so now Jesus, he has breathed his spirit, he has breathed his presence on his church. And what has he called us to do? He has called us to be faithful as we advance the kingdom through showing and sharing the good news of King Jesus. Here's actually how I defined evangelism. It's inviting people into the good news story of King Jesus, who through his death and resurrection is making all things new.
Wow.
This is how I define discipleship. It's actually learning what it means to be human after the image and likeness of Jesus. And so what we're doing is we're learning what it means to be human. We're learning what it means to bring God's kingdom here on earth as it is in heaven. And then one day we see in Revelation 21, where actually heaven and earth collide, where heaven and earth marry, where Jesus is bringing the new city down to earth. It's not like we're going up to a new city into heaven. No, heaven is actually coming because God has always wanted to bring heaven to earth. So now we know that he wants to bring heaven to earth, and his desire has always been for his people to be faithful in all spheres of life. And so this is where what we're doing is we're creating 3 spheres. We're creating the spiritual sphere, what we know as the church. We're creating the social sphere, which is a compassion sphere of how we engage the least of these in our area. So think of the Good Samaritan, and then we're creating the commerce sphere, a cultural sphere of how we are to do business in the world as citizens of the kingdom. And so that's what we've done at Northland, is that we have created 3 separate but interconnected spheres, just like the Trinity, God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit, 3 persons in one. And what we're doing is we're radiating and reflecting the kingdom of God spiritually, socially, and culturally as we show how Jesus, through his death and resurrection, is making all things new.
Now, it'd really be hard for people to imagine that you just gave us what was like a big message right there, right off the top of your head. So this is emanating from your heart. Mm-hmm. This is not something that you came in here with notes, not at all. But man, that whole story of that walk through the Old Testament right there, I was hanging onto the edge of my seat while you're talking about all this, because this is like a pill of history. You just swallow it and you see it. It's there. It's there.
And I know that, and this is part of the model, is that a lot of churches aren't accustomed to that kind of model. And here's the reason why I believe that a lot of churches in America, in anywhere, are not accustomed to this model. We've lived with this notion that America is a Christian nation, and sure, it founded upon Judeo-Christian values, and it was, America was birthed in what we would call a Christendom era, where everything seemed to be Christian. But then now we're in this post-Christian, postmodern era where things aren't Christian, and we have to actually get back to the roots of actually what does it mean to be the church,
right.
And that's what this model does. I was in Rwanda last year, and I was teaching this model to a group of pastors in Rwanda, and they came up to me afterwards, and they were just floored because the government in Rwanda is shutting down churches because they're saying that these churches are of no good to the community. But when I taught this model about how they can create their own NGOs to engage the least of these in the community, how they can create schools, how they can create businesses, for the glory of God and the good of. They're like, oh my gosh, this is what the government wants us to do. So this is where I'm like, oh my gosh, this is lighting me up, because I'm like, I know this motto is not just for the church in America. This motto is for the church in Rwanda, Uganda, Brazil, Japan. Because it's literally showing in every realm of life how God's kingdom is breaking into time and space.
Wow. That is really good. An NGO, non-government organization then right there. Yep. And, that's something that we're all called. Yet we live in a culture in America where many in the urban cities, especially the big cities, they want the government to do everything for them. So that is going to be the challenge, right, for any church, especially in a large area like Orlando even, to go up against what would be the prevailing thoughts and maybe image and pictures. And then you've got Gen Z issues that are coming up. What are you seeing the next generation? How are you seeing them respond to this vision?
Yeah, they love it. And let me tell you why, because they're coming out. One of the things that we're seeing, we definitely are seeing a movement early early momentum is what I would say. It's not a full movement yet, but early waves of momentum around the younger generation that God is seemingly doing a work in college age young men and young women, and I'm really excited about this. But if you think about the narrative or the philosophy that they are coming out of, they're coming out of this postmodern philosophy that says that there is no overarching meta narrative. There's no overarching story for your life. There's no really purpose for why you relate to one another. There's really no purpose for why you are supposed to create or supposed to be in vocation. There's really no overarching story of why you should operate or steward your money, your time, there's no overarching story. You just do you. Whatever's true for you is true for you. Like, that's no story. But now we have literally the story of God from the very beginning. So we know that God is eternal, but He is the one who got things going in time and space, and so we know what His purpose is for human beings. We know why He wants us to relate, create, and operate. He's wanting us to bring His kingdom into reality. And so when you actually now have tangible ways that you're doing that, from how you are doing this thing called church community, how you are engaging the least of these in the community, regardless of what their faith background is, and when you are showing them what does it look like to run a school, what does it look like to run an apparel business, what does it look like to own a rental business, what does it look like to own a cafe, what does it look like? Then you're actually showing them how every area of their life intersects with the kingdom of God.
Wow. All right. We're out of time, but this is so great. Josh Laxton, give us the website for Northland, how people can find out more and hear maybe some of your sermons.
Yeah, so northlandchurch.net is how you can find Northland, and then you can also find us all on the social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram. We're on the TikTok, or LinkedIn, but Northland Church, Longwood, Florida.
I love the message. I love your church. Thank you for coming in and sharing with us today. And man, I think I'm going to have to enroll in school after all of this. This is great. Josh Laxton, my guest. I'll be back in a moment with one more segment. This is the Mike Gilland Show.
Thanks for listening to Extra Takes. Be sure to follow us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts so you won't miss a single episode.